It used to take hours to do an adjustment of one or two numbers, and a lot of back and forth and a lot of conversation. And now we can just do it like Jared just showed. You can do it in seconds and minutes. AdventHealth is a faith-based nonprofit healthcare system. We operate in about 9 states with 55 hospitals, and we just crossed over 100,000 team members. We operate across the entire care world, from hospitals and outpatient facilities to home health, urgent care, all of that. But specifically inside of investments, we play a key role in just ensuring that long-term stability. And then inside of that group, I'm the director of data strategy and analytics. So I'm tasked with bringing in all of the data, or empowering the people that work with me to bring in all the data, put it into a nice spot where we can have flexibility and accessibility to it, and then be able to tell our story to both our internal stakeholders and outside.
I'm Jared Flores. I am the founder of DataFlow. We are an analytics consulting group ranging the full stack, data engineering, data visualization. And I have been in a consulting role with AdventHealth with the investments team for about a year now. Started out with kind of maintaining some of the current data processes while one team member went out on leave. And then after that, it kind of shifted towards fixing some of the inefficiencies, understanding some of those pain points, and modernizing the stack to move forward there.
So before, our reporting process was about 10 years old. So it was operating on some older technology, and it was very slow, really rigid, a lot of static dashboards, not a lot of interactivity, a lot of ad hoc things happening here and there. And so we had a lot of bottlenecks that kind of dampened our efficiency and our accessibility and our flexibility. So as the business moved, we had to move with it, but it was taking a long time for us to kind of move. So we were looking for something that helped us be able to collaborate with our teams internally without having to go back and forth and talk through these things on Teams or on email. So that's kind of where we were, and we're hoping to get something better out of that. Jared and I worked together at both of our previous positions, and so I was familiar with Jared from then. We had worked on some pretty tough projects together and came out on top of those. So when I came over here and started working here, we connected on LinkedIn, and we were like, hey, I have a need here to kind of fill this in. And Jared's like, well, great. I have a company that can help you. And then as he unpacked our data structure and our tech stack and all of that, he was the one who was like, hey, I think you should check out Sigma and just see. It looks like a good solution outside of a Power BI or a Tableau approach.
Yeah, so I had seen some rumblings of Sigma. I had been introduced to it in some previous roles, and also just clients kind of asking and saying, hey, looking at the BI stack, we've heard about Sigma. What is it? Is it something that could fit the need for us? I kind of started digging into it on my own, looking at it as it was advancing, and really a lot of the visuals that I was being asked to build were in a more dynamic structure, a lot more table-based, but then having some flexibility of write back and things like that. So I started really trying to explore where I could find use cases for it to fill some of those gaps. Once I really understood the kind of the impact of the write back functionality and how that could play into the interactivity of the workbooks, that's when I started working with more and more clients as far as, it seems like we've entered this space of, it's not necessarily a dashboard that organizations are looking for. It is more of an application. It is more, we need some interface where we can see our data and interact with it and have that interaction impact our systems and our other processes. And so, yeah, once with all of the difficulties that we were having with the Advent process, it just kind of seemed like the perfect match there. Yeah, so what it is, the process before was there was a Power BI report. It was basically a daily snapshot of the portfolio performance, what the current balances are, how they've changed day to day, month to date, year to date. And each morning it would come in through Power Automate, it would generate a PDF, but a lot of the times it was scheduled to generate early in the morning, but the data wasn't fully refreshed, some transactions weren't captured, portfolio values were incorrect, the day-to-day changes were incorrect. So there was just a lot of inconsistencies where sometimes it was a data vendor issue where they needed to refresh their system, and we'd have to go through and refresh everything, and it would be, a 15, 20-minute refresh, or we would have to go in and manually hard code the values because that data was just simply missing. So with Sigma, what we built is same concept, daily snapshot of the portfolio values, but there is now interactivity for the investment team to go in, make an adjustment to a particular account, and have that adjustment be reflected not only on the current report, but then that data and that adjustment pushed into Snowflake. So that way, if we need to do any reporting on portfolio performance anywhere else in any other models, those adjustments are reflected and also captured historically, because previously we were just kind of hard coding on a day-to-day basis, so we wouldn't be able to tell what the portfolio looked like 5 days ago. So now we have that historical, and it's something where that the management of that process is now more so on the end users rather than the data team. And there are controls in there to make sure that if an incorrect adjustment is made, then they can go in and make the correct adjustment, and we still have an audit log of who's doing what, and also that enables us to capture which funds are the more frequent culprits. So then we can take that back to the vendors and say, hey, look how often we're having to adjust these. Where can we tighten up the process?
It becomes a little easier for change management when your process before was so terrible. So it was to Jared was talking about it, but it was a very difficult, time consuming, lot of back and forth, a lot of room for error, and neither the data team or the investment team really loved that at all. And so I think it was a pretty easy thing for us to say, hey, we've got something that's going to really alleviate this bottleneck that happens between the time it takes you to look at it and make sure from an investment perspective that these feel right in the logical world, and for us on our side to then make the adjustment and wait 15, 20, 30 minutes for it to run. We think we have something that might work better for you in that way, clean up the errors that could be made just by fat fingering things in, the amount of time spent, all those things. And so when we came to them with this solution, honestly, they were just more excited than anything else, because it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort on both ends. And this makes it so that the two teams can collaborate in their special skill sets in one spot, so that we're not having to, us data people live over here and we make the adjustments that the investment people say they need to make. And then we go back and we send them a PDF and say, is this right? And they come back and say, no, there's not right. So they were super receptive.
I think really the biggest challenge that I always face with something new is that it's new. So there's always this question of, it's not what I'm used to looking at. How do we trust the data? How do we know that it's right? And so that is always just a hard mental wall to try to break through. So really the approach here was, we're going to create something that takes advantage of a lot of the capability that Sigma has with being able to make the adjustments, interact with it like an application, but we're going to make it look very similar to the old report, not because we think that's what we want it to look like forever, but because this is a lot easier to mentally say, this is familiar. It is a little bit new and more modern. It definitely feels fresh, but it also feels kind of the same. To just continue to kind of slowly get them in that mindset, it gives it the data a little bit more trust. And then once there's more usage and more, we're kind of off the old process on the new process, and everybody is using it, there's kind of a rhythm there, then we can start incorporating the things that we really want to incorporate, some more impactful visuals, some more insights, and then kind of start changing up things and really introducing things that they might not be used to seeing, because now the trust is there and it's established. So that's really the approach here, was just, let's get to parity on another system and have it feel and look similar. And then once they've got the grasp of that, let's introduce new concepts and all of the things in Sigma that make it really powerful. And the building process of it too is very straightforward. I think, there's a definite sense that the design approach and the functionality within Sigma is largely based on a lot of the pain points in other BI tools and kind of overcoming those challenges. So especially when it comes to, we're talking investments and financial data, A lot of the times that's pivot tables. It's just straightforward tabular formats, which can be really difficult in a lot of other tools. So it was really straightforward to kind of put together and create that. So the actual building the bones of it, if I try to kind of estimate through some of the back and forth and some of the iterations, I would say total development time, maybe a month. And that's because the initial bare bones probably took about a week to just get something that looked exactly like the old report. But then at the time, kind of fumbling around, what is the data app? How would we build something like that? There were a couple iterations of that. At one point, we were kind of navigating through different pages, and then we started using some of the newer, the modal UI and things like that. So really, honestly, as far as building something in a completely new platform that has the same data model, and that month time is including the data modeling, migrating from old SQL Server to Snowflake and all of that, validating the data. So yeah, probably about a month.
So the out of the box thing for us is Power BI, and it just didn't do visually anything to help us modernize anything. Some of the what you would consider pretty easy points to want in a visual aren't available easily. Sure, you could build a bunch of code behind it and you could eventually label the endpoints of a line graph, but it takes tons of effort to do that, especially with some of these investment data things. That's one example. The endpoint lines just couldn't be labeled, and that's a big deal when you're in investment data that loves lines. So I think Power BI solution is fine if you're analyzing. For us, it was fine if you were analyzing tables of information and you wanted to see things and whatever else, but it fell flat for us when we wanted to move over to a visual that was modern and easily manipulated, and some of those smarts that a visual and a story would have now are available without a ton of effort in building it.
So this is the view that they are familiar with looking at. Like I said, we kind of created something that felt similar, but also a little bit more modern design to it. So that way they get a little bit of a new feeling to it. And so basically, when they open it up, it's always looking at the latest date, which would be the previous day, and it will show all of the values. And so let's say, they come in, we're looking at it just to validate before sending it out. And maybe these shouldn't be 0. Maybe there should be some change here. And so then they can come in to say they need to make an adjustment. The date that they're making the adjustment for is for yesterday. We need to adjust the Weber solutions. And we also need to make sure, because some of these can have multiple accounts tied to them, that we're pointing at the specific account within it. And so now that I've got that selected, let's say that the daily change needed to be 50,000. So once I enter that, when I click confirm, it's going to just kind of prompt the user hey, this is going into the data warehouse. It'll affect this and other reports. So just one more validation. They can go back or exit if they need to, but if it looks good, they can submit. Lets us know that that was entered. And let's say we also need to enter another adjustment for this DQR portfolio. So I can come in here again, go to yesterday's date, look for BQR, find the ticker there, and enter 50,000 there. So now when that reloads, so now those that have the adjustments that we made, and that aggregates up. So everything has that adjustment now. And same thing, if I needed to go back to a previous date and say, we want to go back and look at the Monday daily report. And when we go back and look at it, those daily changes actually should have also been there. There should have been some daily changes for those portfolios there. So again, I can go back and adjust previous dates as well. And this is to make sure that we are always able to reference that data and have that point in time snapshot of what the portfolio actually looked like. And let's say, okay, I entered a $5,000 adjustment. It actually should have been 50,000. I messed that up. So I can come back in and just make a new adjustment that will overwrite the previous adjustment. So this right here already solves a lot of the issues where previously, if we had made an adjustment, say it was we hard coded 5,000, it should have been 50,000. That delays us a whole hour of having to, we submitted it, wait for the reloading, it's wrong. Now we have to submit it again, wait for it to reload again. And here we did that in a couple seconds. So that's what it looks like on the front end. So then everything looks good. They can go and send that out. What's happening on the back end, when we make those adjustments, they feed into this table here, or this is our input table, essentially, that the modal is feeding into. And so it captures the date that it was entered, all of the tickers and all of that, and what the adjustments are, when they were entered, who made them, and also captures those row start and end dates, because when we make an adjustment to a portfolio, that adjustment should persist every day in the future until a new adjustment is made or somebody goes in and basically zeroes them all out. Because that was another issue that we were kind of seeing, is just making those adjustments persist over time. So that's the way this is set up. When an adjustment is made, that adjustment is going to hold true until at some point in the future, let's say tomorrow, we don't need a $50,000 adjustment. The data synced up correctly, everything looks fine. Then we can go in and zero it out. There will be no more adjustment until somebody needs to come in again. This is our audit log. We're able to see who's making what adjustments, but also to that one issue like here, where I made 2 adjustments on the same day, how do I know in the future which one is going to carry forward? When the data is fed into here through the input table, it then gets passed into this table, which groups it to say which was the last update time for that particular account on that particular day. So in this one, we made 2 adjustments to that account. Once it groups those and gets those values, it then feeds them into this table to capture basically for every day, even if multiple adjustments were made to one account on that day, it's only going to give us the one that was made most recently. And that's what should feed into all of the rest of the reporting. So it's just, user inputs, it gets into our log table. That log table is what gets fed back into Snowflake. And then it kind of has through our lineage in the workbook, feeds into these tables to group them, pick the latest row, feed that into the visuals. And then that way in our table that we have that was written back into Snowflake, we always have that full log to do whatever we need to with reporting. We can do the same thing where we filter it down to the last row to use that in downstream reporting, or like I said, kind of generate almost like a vendor scorecard of sort, right? Like a data vendor scorecard of how often we're seeing data inconsistencies. Yeah, I think just in general, one of the things that has been really helpful throughout this process is being able to see all of the lineage of what's feeding into what, where is everything coming from? How is that feeding into all of the different elements? And then also really being able to take advantage of some of the worksheets that we see here. Some of the things being fed are filtered individually. So like in this table, for example, being able to filter that element individually. But then for these actual KPI cards, instead of filtering them, we're sourcing them from this table. So just that kind of concept of being able to create almost a data model out of your workbook itself makes things just visually more clear of where all of this data is coming from and how to troubleshoot your way backwards.
I think our biggest one is efficiency gains. I think, like I said, it used to take hours to do an adjustment of 1 or 2 numbers, and a lot of back and forth and a lot of conversation. And now we can just do it like Jared just showed. You can do it in seconds and minutes, and it's ready, and it saves us an incredible amount of time. And it improves morale as well, with just the annoyance of having to go back and forth so much. And I think it gives us a bit more control on what we see and how we see it across the entire landscape. They are currently loving that on the back end, they can make adjustments. They don't have to feel like they have to always ask us what's happening. They can see what's happening. We gave them a ramp to test it and try to break it and make mistakes and all that kind of stuff. So they've gotten now comfortable with all of it, and they can already feel the benefits of that collaboration. It's a great tool. I think the advice I would give as you're considering is allow it to be an open box of thinking. Allow yourself to imagine that it could work, not to be scared of perhaps having to upend a little bit of what you know to be true and how your data is structured and where it sits. Be open to that so, because the benefits are really great. So Jared can speak to that too. It's like it caused us to be excited and to redo some of the stuff that maybe we wouldn't have touched otherwise. So there's always, like Jared mentioned, there's always apprehension on trying to figure out if this is the right and new solution. But if you allow yourself to kind of just be a little bit open and think, hey, this has a lot of possibilities. It might take a little work on our end to fix things, but Sigma makes that pretty easy.
Yeah, I think it's definitely to evaluate, what do your processes look like today, and are you at a stage where, is it a dashboard that you're looking for, or is it a application? Is it a platform that you can see your data, have your reporting and your insights, but also interact with it, and even incorporate product into it, right? Like there are always going to be challenges where we want data to reflect source system as much as possible, but how we need to report that to stakeholders, to consumers, maybe those things just don't align, and it doesn't make sense to alter values in the source system for a specific consumer, right? So then you can change how you think about handling those things. A lot of the times those would have been handled by your engineering team. They're going to create manual tables, and then your data team kind of becomes owner of all of those processes. Whereas using data apps, you can build interfaces to have those kind of tables, those mapping values. It just brings that as a part of the discussion of how do we think about data processes, and make sure that the data team is really focused on things that should be their priority in the hands of the data team, and that for some of these other things, when we put interactivity not only with the dashboards and the data, but with the database into the hands of the end users, just what does that make our data processes in general look like? I think my advice would be to think outside of the box a little bit and just imagine what kind of process efficiencies you would see if some of the stakeholders that come to the data team are able to interact with the database in that way.
There's a unending list of things that we want to build inside of Sigma. Like I said, our process was static somewhat. And so now we get to move into this world where it is so flexible. So there's so many things that we have on the list. In fact, I think Jared and I and the rest of our team kind of are daily talking about, okay, what do we get to do next? Like what's next? And using some of those features, and seeing how Sigma incorporates AI and all these different things that I think are going to become like a really good jumping off point to a lot of different organizations seeing what we have, because a lot of people see our data. There are recipients outside of the investment team that see it in finance or in supply chain or in sustainability. So our reach is pretty far in that way. And so it's going to be cool to watch it launch out and kind of catch maybe a little bug of modernized app reporting that has insights and flexibility and interactivity.
Yeah, I think, like Kelly mentioned, there's a lot of possibilities, a lot of directions that we want to go with it now, that we've got our data in Snowflake, now that we've got Sigma, and the users are excited for it. And then also just in general, I think it opens up a lot of doors, like I said, for organizations, but also for individuals. I've had my toe in app development, and I think being able to utilize Sigma in that way would allow organizations or startups to become better about how they think about becoming a data product business, right? Because those are everywhere. You've got all kinds of data products, and we're going to sell you this database or this spreadsheet, things like that, versus being able to say, okay, we've gathered the data and we have it. Maybe we don't have the chops to go in and build this whole entire web app or some native application that ties into our database, but we can create something with Sigma, and then what was solely a data product, just kind of selling that information, now becomes an actual product. Now you have multiple tiers to that, so it changes how people are able to move in that direction and continue to build useful products that talk to data, that use the data. A lot of those companies that are gathering data in that way, you think about like real estate data, they have a vision of why they think it's useful. They're just not building the end piece of that. And so if they have a tool like this to be able to offer that, then you've got two products that we could sell you our data, or we could sell you access to what we've built that uses it, and all kinds of different ways that you could structure that and customize that. That's just easier than hiring a bunch of web developers and just doing straight code development in that way. The direction that Sigma is going with the data apps makes a lot of sense. The BI landscape is very challenging right now. Power BI fits very well into the Microsoft stack, but it's definitely built for the more technical user. You've got to learn a lot of, got to learn DAX and Power Query and things like that. And then it doesn't have that look and feel that people kind of associate with like premium product. Tableau is becoming really ingrained in the Salesforce ecosystem, which is great for Salesforce customers. But if you're not a Salesforce customer, you're kind of stuck out in the ether. Even if you are a huge enterprise that's got a huge deployment, there's just going to kind of more and more pressure to become a Salesforce driven organization. And if that's just not part, or it doesn't make sense for the business, it's really bringing all these questions of, where do we go? What do we do with our BI stack? And so Sigma really kind of capitalizing on the fact that everybody is shifting towards cloud warehousing, whether it's Snowflake or Redshift or Azure, wherever it is, being able to utilize that and build the data on top of that in a way that doesn't necessarily have to live in Microsoft or have to live in Salesforce or anything like that. It just opens up the floor. It opens up a lot of possibilities. Like I said, the pain points that as a developer that we feel a lot of the time as far as designing certain things and some of the limitations there, you can definitely feel that even as the product continues to change, as Sigma continues to change today, that a lot of the feedback is definitely being taken into consideration as new features come out.